Welcome to Graveyard Mile, where the past never stays buried, and every story has a chill waiting for you. If you love late-night mysteries, haunted places, and spine-tingling legends, you're in the right place. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a walk through the shadows. At the corner of North 2nd and Kentucky Street, in the quiet town of Atchison, Kansas, stand a modest, two-story home that looks like it could belong to anyone's grandmother. Pale, peeling paint, a small front porch sagging with age, a maple tree leaning over it, as if to shield it from the decades of whispers. To the casual passerby, it's just another aging Midwestern home. But to the people of Atchison, it's the Sallie House. The story, as it's been told for over a century, begins in the mid-1800s with a girl named Sallie, just 6 years old. The tale goes that Sallie was brought to the house one humid summer afternoon, clutching her stomach and crying out in pain. Inside lived a physician, Dr. Charles Finney, who treated townsfolk out of the small front room that doubled as his examination office. According to the legend, Dr. Finney believed Sallie was suffering from appendicitis. There was no time for an ambulance, no nearby hospital. Desperate to save her, he prepared for surgery right there on his table. But in his haste, he either didn't wait for the anesthesia to take effect, or perhaps didn't have enough. The girl screamed when the scalpel touched her skin, and then, they say, she went silent forever. That's the story, at least, the one passed around like gospel by ghost hunters and tourists alike. The one that gave the house its name, the Sallie House. But there's a problem with it. No town record lists a Sallie who died in Atchison during that period. No obituary, no burial notice, no official documentation that a little girl ever died under Dr. Finney's care. Yet, there was a Dr. Charles Finney. He practiced medicine out of that very home during the late 19th century. Neighbors remembered him as eccentric, maybe cold. And after his wife's passing in 1906, he lived the rest of his years alone in that same house. His front windows always shuttered, his yard unkept. Locals say that after the doctor's death, no one stayed in the house for long. Tenants came and went. Some heard noises, others saw things they couldn't explain. Over the years, the legend of Sallie grew like ivy on the walls, tangled, stubborn, impossible to remove. It wasn't until a young couple named Tony and Deborah Pickman moved in nearly a century later that the story would come alive again, and darker than ever before. When Tony and Deborah first saw the house, it seemed perfect. They were newly married, expecting their first child, and eager to start a life together. The rent was affordable, the neighborhood quiet, and despite its age, the house had charm. Crown molding, old wood floors, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Deborah called it a starter dream home. From the moment they moved in, however, something about the house felt unsettled. It started small. The occasional flicker of a light bulb, the faint creak of floorboards when no one was moving. Tony brushed it off as the quirks of an old house. Deborah, ever the practical one, agreed. Probably the wiring, she said with a laugh. But as the days passed, the atmosphere thickened. The temperature would drop sharply in certain rooms, then rise again within seconds. Their infant son, Taylor, began to cry uncontrollably whenever they brought him into the nursery upstairs. Deborah blamed teething, but the moment they carried him out of the room, he'd quiet as if soothed by some unseen presence. One afternoon, while Tony was at work, Deborah was folding laundry when she heard something upstairs, a faint thud, then the sound of footsteps moving across the nursery floor. She froze. The baby was asleep in the living room. "Tony," she called out instinctively, even though she knew he wasn't home. Silence. Just the creak of old boards settling. She told herself it was the house, and nothing more. A week later, something stranger happened. Tony had spent the morning mowing the lawn. When he came inside to grab water, Deborah was standing in the nursery doorway, her face pale. "Tony," she said, "did you do this?" He followed her gaze into the room, and his breath caught. The baby stuffed animals were arranged in a perfect circle on the floor, not tossed about, not placed randomly, but arranged, each one sitting upright, facing inward as if part of some ritual meeting. The nursery light was on, flickering slightly, though neither of them remembered switching it. Tony laughed it off at first. "Maybe you did it and forgot," he said, but Deborah shook her head. "No, I was downstairs the whole time." That night, the light in the nursery turned on again by itself. Tony went up to turn it off. When he reached the top of the stairs, a rush of cold air swept past him, carrying a faint scent of something he couldn't quite place, sweet, almost floral, like lilacs after rain. He glanced around. Nothing, just the quiet hum of the house. But as he reached for the light switch, the bulb above him flickered violently, once, twice, then went out. The next morning, they found the light bulb intact, still screwed in, still good. But when Tony tried to turn it on, it refused to glow. They replaced it anyway, and then another burned out a day later. That was only the beginning. The house, it seemed, was waking up. By late autumn, the Pickmans had stopped trying to explain away the strange things. What began as flickering lights and stuffed animals soon deepened into something colder, something that made their skin prickle and their marriage strain in ways they couldn't have imagined. Tony, once an easygoing man who laughed off ghost stories, had begun to lose sleep. Every night, after Deborah and baby Taylor were asleep, he'd lie awake listening. Sometimes he'd hear soft footsteps in the hallway, light, almost playful. Other times, they were heavier, pacing back and forth outside the nursery. When he'd check, no one was there. At first, he tried not to tell Deborah. She'd been tired enough with the baby, and he didn't want to scare her. But the house wasn't subtle. One evening, Deborah came into the kitchen, holding a picture frame. "Tony, did you do this?" It was one of their wedding photos. The glass was cracked down the middle, and the frame, hung perfectly straight just that morning, was now flipped upside down. Tony stared at it. "No." "Then who?" He didn't have an answer. The next day, it happened again. 3 more photos, all of family members, turned upside down. Every other decoration in the house was untouched. That night, Tony woke up shivering. The air felt like winter had seeped into the walls. The clock read 3:12 a.m. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself and turned toward Deborah, but she was sound asleep. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft and close to his ear. "He's mine." Tony sat up, so fast the blanket fell off the bed. "Deb." She stirred, half asleep. "What's wrong?" He swallowed hard. "Nothing. Bad dream." But he didn't sleep again that night. Days blurred into weeks. The house's oddities began to center around him, as if he was the focus. He'd feel cold spots brush against his arms. Tools would go missing, then reappear in odd places. One morning, he found a candle on the coffee table partially melted into a puddle of wax, its wick untouched by flame. In the cooling wax, tiny handprints were pressed into the surface. Small, child-sized. Deborah tried to stay calm for their baby's sake. She prayed. She called her mother. She burned sage. But nothing helped. Then came the night of the first fire. It was a Saturday in November. Deborah was bathing Taylor while Tony watched a football game in the living room. Out of nowhere, the smell of smoke hit him, faint but sharp. "Debbie," called. "You cooking something?" No answer. He followed the smell into the nursery. At first, he didn't see anything wrong. The crib was fine, the curtains untouched. But when he turned toward the rocking chair, his heart stopped. A doll, Taylor's favorite, was sitting on the chair, its dress smoldering. Tiny flames licked at its fabric, eating it away, yet nothing else nearby was burning. Not the chair, not the carpet, just the doll. Tony grabbed a towel and smothered the flame. When he unwrapped it, only the doll's eyes remained intact, two black beads staring up from a half-melted face. Deborah ran in, clutching the baby. "What happened?" "I don't know," Tony said. His voice was trembling. "It just started." They called the fire department, but by the time the crew arrived, there was no sign of open flame, just the scorched remains of the doll. The chief, an older man who'd seen his share of electrical mishaps, scratched his head. "Doesn't make sense," he said. "Nothing around is burned." Tony wanted to move out that night. Deborah insisted they stay. "Maybe it's a bad wire or something. We can fix it." But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't the wiring. The fire had felt intentional. Winter came early to Atchison that year. The wind howled off the Missouri River, rattling the old windows of the house like skeletal fingers. Inside, the Pickmans were unraveling. Tony had begun keeping a journal, something the Sightings TV crew had suggested when they reached out after hearing about the hauntings. Each night, he'd write down what happened. Strange noises, flickering lights, moving objects. The entries became darker as the days went on. December 3rd, heard someone whisper again. Same phrase, "He's mine." My arms feel cold where it spoke. Deb thinks I'm seeing things. December 9th, photos flipped again. Found scratches on my stomach this morning. 3 lines, red and burning. Didn't feel them happen. Deborah had started to worry about him. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, his hands shaking. "You're not yourself," she said one morning, touching his cheek. "I don't think it likes me," he muttered. "Ooh." He didn't answer. That night, Tony set up a small camera in the nursery, hoping to catch whatever was happening. But around midnight, as he was drifting to sleep, a scream jolted him upright. "Deborah's." He ran into the nursery. She was standing by the crib, her eyes wide, pointing. "Something scratched you," she gasped. Tony looked down. Across his back, in angry red lines, 3 fresh scratches were appearing, slowly, as if an invisible hand were dragging its nails down his skin. The Sightings camera crew, who had been scheduled to arrive the next morning, would later witness the same thing happen in real time. The next few days were a blur of fear. The crew documented objects moving, lights flickering, and temperature drops so sudden the cameras fogged over. Then, one night, Tony saw her. It was just past 1 a.m. The baby had finally gone down. Tony was heading downstairs for water when movement caught his eye. At the end of the hallway stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her dress was old-fashioned, white with lace trim. Her hair, a soft brown, framed a pale face. For a moment, Tony froze. "Are you lost?" he whispered. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if listening. Then she smiled, a faint, sorrowful smile, and vanished. He stood there for nearly a minute, staring at the empty hallway, his heart pounding. When he told Deborah, she went pale. "Sallie," she said softly. He didn't want to believe it, but from that night on, the house changed. Shadows grew darker. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and the little girl wasn't the only one there. A week later, Tony saw another figure, a woman this time, wearing what looked like an old maid's outfit. Her features were blurry, but she resembled Deborah in shape and stance. He blinked, and she was gone. The next night, while Tony lay half asleep, something darker appeared. It wasn't a child or a woman. It was a shape, shifting and twisting, black as soot, crawling up from the corner of the room. It had no face, just movement, fluid and wrong. Tony screamed. Deborah woke to find him thrashing, his eyes wide with terror. "It's here," he yelled. "It's watching me." But when she turned on the light, there was nothing. Nothing but the cold. And yet, the house wasn't finished. Fires, scratches, shadows, voices. All of it was leading to something worse. Something that would finally drive the Pickmans out for good. By January, The Pickmans were barely holding it together. Deborah had taken to sleeping with the hallway light on, clutching their baby monitor like a lifeline. Tony, once confident and protective, now looked hollow-eyed and jumpy. He'd flinch at sudden noises, stare too long into empty corners. This Sightings crew had come and gone, capturing enough unexplainable activity to fill hours of footage. But their visit only seemed to stir the house further. Whatever haunted them, it didn't like being watched. The first attack happened in the middle of the day. Tony was in the nursery, fixing a loose window latch. Deborah was downstairs feeding Taylor. Out of nowhere, Tony shouted a strangled, pained yell. When Deborah ran up, she found him leaning against the crib, his shirt torn, his skin marked with what looked like bite marks. Small, human-sized impressions, deep enough to draw blood. "Oh my God, Tony!" she cried, grabbing a towel. He stared at the marks in disbelief. I didn't feel it happen. I just felt something grab me." By that night, the bite marks had faded, replaced by long scratches that appeared without warning. Once, while the camera crew filmed, 3 bright red welts formed across his stomach in real time. The crew gasped. The camera caught it all. Tony grimacing in pain, the scratches blooming like something alive beneath his skin. It wasn't only physical. The house began to twist his mind. Tony started to hear them, voices that seemed to slither between the walls. Sometimes it was laughter, high and girlish. Sometimes it was whispering too faint to understand. And then, one night, it wasn't faint at all. "Heard her." The words came from behind him, soft but unmistakable. He turned. No one there. He pressed his palms against his ears. "Leave me alone," he shouted. Deborah ran in, startled. "Who are you talking to?" Tony blinked, his breath shaky. "She's talking to me again." The girl. Deborah took a step closer. "What did she say?" He hesitated. "She told me to hurt you." Her eyes filled with fear. "Tony, this isn't you. You need to rest. You're exhausted." But Tony couldn't rest. Not anymore. Each night the dreams came. Violent, vivid, and wrong. He'd see Deborah standing in the kitchen, her eyes black as ink. He'd see himself grabbing a knife. He'd wake drenched in sweat, gasping, terrified of what he might do if he ever sleepwalked. Then came the night of the cat. Deborah had gone to bed early with Taylor, exhausted from the day. Tony stayed up watching TV, though he couldn't focus. Around 2 a.m., he dozed off on the couch. When he woke, he was standing in the kitchen. His hands were shaking. His breath came fast, uneven. He didn't remember walking there, didn't remember anything. Then he saw it. Their cat, Max, lay on the counter, motionless. A kitchen knife pinned its small body in place. Tony stumbled backward, horrified. "No," he whispered. No. He had no memory of doing it. But the knife was one from their own set, his fingerprints all over the handle. Deborah's scream shattered the silence moments later when she came downstairs. "Tony," she sobbed, "what did you do?" "I don't know," he shouted, falling to his knees. "I swear I don't know." From that night forward, Deborah wouldn't let him hold the baby alone. Tony begged her to leave the house, but something in him had changed. He wasn't sure if he was asking for her sake or his own. At times, he'd feel an almost magnetic pull toward the nursery, as if something waited for him there. The same scent of lilacs would drift through the air, followed by the faint sound of a child humming an old lullaby. Once in the mirror above their dresser, he saw a figure standing behind him. Not the little girl this time, but something darker. A shape, human-like but warped. Its eyes, if it had any, glowed faintly red. He turned around. Nothing. But when he looked back at the mirror, the reflection smiled. The night it all ended began like any other. Cold wind outside. The faint creak of old wood inside. Deborah had been packing boxes quietly during the day. She decided, No matter what Tony said, they were leaving. She hadn't told him yet, afraid he'd think she was running from him, not the house. But that night, the house made the decision for her. It was late. Deborah was sitting in bed, reading while Tony brushed his teeth. The baby monitor crackled beside her. Through the static, she thought she heard whispering. At first, she assumed it was interference. Then the voice grew clearer, a little girl's voice. "Mommy!" Deborah froze. "Tony!" she called out. He stepped into the doorway, toothbrush in hand. "Yeah." She held up the monitor. "Did you hear that?" He listened. Silence. Then, faintly, through the speaker, "He's mine." The monitor went dead. Before either of them could move, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Tony rushed down first, Deborah right behind him. The living room lights flickered wildly. Every picture frame on the wall was upside down. The air was freezing, their breath visible as they stood there. Then, without warning, Tony was thrown backward, lifted off his feet, and slammed against the staircase banister, with splintered, several rungs cracking under his weight. He hit the floor hard, gasping for air. "Tony!" Deborah screamed, rushing to his side. He was pale, shaking, eyes wide with panic. "It pushed me," he whispered. "Something pushed me. That was it." Deborah didn't hesitate. She grabbed Taylor, wrapped him in a blanket, and half-dragged Tony out the front door. They didn't stop until they were sitting in their car, headlights cutting through the night. The house loomed behind them, quiet again. Tony stared at it through the windshield. He doesn't want us to go," he murmured. Deborah's hands trembled as she turned key. Too bad. They left that night and never went back. In the weeks that followed, Tony's injuries healed, but the nightmares didn't. Even miles away, he'd wake up covered in sweat, feeling the same cold breath at his ear. Deborah tried to find explanations, trauma, exhaustion, suggestion, but some nights she'd swear she heard faint giggles through the baby monitor, even in their new home. And every once in a while, their son's toys, neatly packed in boxes, will be found scattered on the floor in a perfect circle. After the Pickmans fled, the house stood empty for nearly a year. Neighbors noticed lights flicker inside at odd hours. Sometimes they swore they heard a child crying from the upstairs window. A few brave local teenagers dared each other to go inside. None stayed long. One boy later told police that a cold wind pushed him toward the stairs and nearly sent him tumbling. The legend of Sallie had existed for decades, but the Pickmans' ordeal reignited national fascination. Word spread fast. Within months, paranormal investigators, television producers, and curious tourists began showing up in Atchison with cameras and recorders in hand. One of the first organized investigations was by a local research group. They spent 2 nights in the house, documenting electromagnetic readings and strange temperature drops. On the second night, one of their members felt a sharp pain in her arm. When she rolled up her sleeve, she found 3 deep scratches, just like Tony's. The footage they captured was unsettling. A faint voice whispering. A shadow crossing the nursery wall when no one was in the room. A small ball rolling across the floor on its own. Then came ghost adventures. Zach Bagans and his crew entered the house in the early 2000s, bringing with them the latest paranormal tech, infrared cameras, motion sensors, EVP recorders. The results, even to skeptics, were difficult to ignore. When they called out Sallie's name, their meters spiked. A female voice, faint and childlike, was captured on audio. "I'm here." Later that night, one of the cameramen reported feeling something pull at his shirt collar, hard enough to leave red marks. But even stranger were the patterns. Every time someone spoke harshly toward the unseen presence, the activity intensified. Every time someone showed compassion, speaking gently, calling the ghost sweetheart or honey, the air seemed to soften, as if the entity responded emotionally. It left investigators divided. Was Sallie truly a frightened child? Or was something else, something darker, pretending to be one? In 2017, the popular Astonishing Legends podcast team conducted a special overnight investigation of the Sallie House. Their approach was calm, almost scientific. Set up static microphones, avoid provoking, and record for hours. For most of the night, nothing happened until around 3 a.m. The recording picked up what sounded like breathing. Slow, close to the microphone. Then a faint hum, like a lullaby being sung off-key. And finally a whisper. 2 words. Get out. When the team reviewed the audio the next day, they confirmed that no one in the room had spoken. The voice was female, childlike, and impossibly close to the recorder. Since then, hundreds of visitors have reported similar phenomena. Sudden cold spots, toys moving on their own, cameras malfunctioning, orbs appearing in photographs, and, most disturbingly, the feeling of being watched from the nursery window. Some believe Sallie was real, a lost soul forever reliving her pain, trapped in the house where she died. Others argue that the house never held the little girl's ghost at all, that it's something far older and more malevolent, using her story as a disguise. There's even a theory that the energy came from Dr. Finney himself, that years of grief, guilt, and solitude left a psychic scar so deep that it birthed its own haunting echo. Whatever the cause, no one who spent time inside those walls walks away unchanged. Today, the Sallie House still stands in Atchison, a small, ordinary home with an extraordinary reputation. The city has embraced it as part of its identity. You can even book a guided tour or, if you're brave enough, an overnight stay. During the day, sunlight spills through the windows, and it almost feels normal. Almost. But at night, when the lights go out and the creaking of old wood begins, that same uneasy quiet returns. Visitors report the same sensations the Pickmans once described. Sudden chills, faint whispers, toys shifting ever so slightly when no one is looking. Some guests swear they've seen a little girl in a white dress peering from the nursery doorway. Others have felt a tug on their sleeve or a small, unseen hand brushing against their arm. No one ever stays comfortable for long. The house is said to choose who it reveals itself to. A skeptic might spend a peaceful night, hearing nothing but the wind. But a sensitive soul, someone open to belief, might wake at 3 a.m. to a quiet voice near their ear. Sometimes it says hello, sometimes it hums, and sometimes when the air grows too cold to breathe, it whispers that same phrase Tony heard all those years ago. He's mine.